morning. It has been a little too long since we've been here. I think it's probably been about 5 years since the last time we were here, maybe more. But we are the Gonnermans. Okay. And we are missionaries in the Tokyo area of Japan. We actually only have Jonah with us this morning. Last week we were recovering from some colds, and especially the younger two still had some lingering coughs and things, so they stayed home with Grandma, and we were able to come. But we're thankful for just the ability to be here today. When we talk about Japan, a lot of times people ask, why Japan? Japan is a first world country. You can get just about anything you want there. Why are we there sharing the gospel? First off, 0.3%, or 1 in 333 people, claim to be evangelical Christians.
The average age of a pastor in Japan is between 60 and 70 years old.
And there we go. They say that there's one missionary for every 65,000 people in Japan. Japan's a country that needs the gospel. As we look at how we got there, I grew up in a Christian home. Every time the church doors were open, my family was at church. But I learned at an early age that wasn't enough. Being in church, listening to sermons, those weren't things that would have my sins forgiven. And so at an early age, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior, that his death on the cross paid for my sins, and that his resurrection gave me a sure hope that I could live forever with him.
I also grew up in a Christian home and was saved at an early age. I'm thankful for it. Even though we moved frequently growing up, my parents always had us involved in a church where we were being discipled, churches where they taught us to serve in things like children's ministry or music or even just cleaning up around the church.
I also was learning how to serve in church. We were in a small church where if I didn't help out, things didn't get done. And so I learned the importance of serving, and as I grew older, I was able to do more and more. As I got into high school, I had to choose a foreign language, and I didn't want to learn German, French, or Spanish, and my high school in Omaha, Nebraska offered Japanese. So I started learning Japanese there, and then my sophomore year, we moved to the Des Moines, Iowa area, and that high school also had Japanese. So I studied 4 years of Japanese at high school, and I didn't realize how rare that was.
But God had a plan.
God did have a plan.
I wanted to study Spanish in high school because I thought that was the most common language and I'd be able to use it in many different ways. And I love Spanish so much that when I graduated from high school, I thought I could be a Spanish teacher. But God led me to a college where they didn't have a Spanish education major, so I enrolled as an English ed major and wanted to study Spanish, so I went and spent 11 months in Peru doing a missionary internship and also learning Spanish. While I was there, I saw that missionaries were really the same. They did the same things that we did. I helped in children's ministries. I helped clean up the church. I helped with music. And I saw that missionaries were just normal people too.
While she was studying to be a Spanish-speaking English teacher, I had the opportunity to go on 2 missions trips to Japan. I was studying to be a pastor, but I knew that God wanted me to serve him, and if I could go to the country that I had studied the language, I thought that would be great. And so I went, and I enjoyed my time. In fact, after the first time, I had the opportunity to go back and did go on a second trip.
As he was getting ready for his second trip, we were dating, and I remember seeing his excitement to go and see the missionaries that he had served with before and to see the country, and I just saw his love for Japan. I thought, you don't think God wants you to be a missionary to Japan? And so I asked him, do you think God wants you to be a missionary to Japan? Because if you do, I don't think this is going to work out because I love Spanish and Hispanic people, and that's where God's led me through ministry, and so I just don't think this will work if you're going to be a missionary to Japan.
And I said, no, God is not leading me to be a missionary in Japan. What God is leading me to do is to be a missions-minded assistant pastor. And so we would be able to work in a church here in America, and we would have a missions emphasis, take trips to go see missionaries in Japan, Peru, or other places that the church supports missionaries. And she liked that idea. And so in 2012, we were married. And it wasn't long after that we started looking for a church that we could do that. In fact, I was in contact with a pastor and had sent in a resume and done a interview over the phone, and it was looking like it might be a good fit for this missions-minded assistant pastor role.
And as he got off the phone from that interview, he checked his email, and he had an email from the Mitas, who are missionaries in Japan, asking us if we would consider coming and helping them for 6 months to a year, starting English ministries in their church.
And I thought to myself, no, because God is already leading. We've got this position. It looks like it's going to be great. It looks like it's very likely to happen. So we're not going to go to this internship. But the problem is, if you say you're going to be missions-minded and God gives you an opportunity to do missions, you probably should at least pray about it. So we did. We started praying, and then after a little bit, we got our pastor involved, and we were talking with other mature Christian believers in our lives and started to realize that, well, actually, yes, God does want us to go on this. And so we started getting ready to go.
And this is the church where we serve, Bethel Baptist Church in Iwatsuki, Japan. We help them with many different things, from cutting down a tree to English classes to whatever they asked us to do. And as we finished up that year there, we really fell in love with the people of the church, they fell in love with the country, and we saw ministries that we had been involved in needing to close because we weren't going to be there anymore.
And so we came back from Japan and joined Baptist Missions and started the journey to become full-time missionaries in Japan. We left in May of 2018, and we called our first term the foundation term. We knew we needed to study the language more. Along with that, the culture. We knew that we had to learn more about the church. We'd done mostly English ministries, but we wanted to learn about the Japanese church. And then also, we wanted to build relationships. It doesn't matter if it's just ministry in a church here in America or there in Japan, relationships are fundamental to any ministry.
The first thing we did was we got involved in a language school. Our language school was about an hour and a half from our apartment in downtown Tokyo in a town called Ochanomizu. And our teachers were really great because it was a Christian language school, so they not only wanted us to learn how to speak Japanese well, but to be able to communicate our faith.
And so the hard part about that was it was downtown, which meant we were traveling over an hour each way to commute. I was taking classes in the morning, and Janae took classes a couple times in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. And the most difficult part of that was when we had class on the same day, Janae would have to get ready pretty early.
So I would leave the house, and we had it timed where I would get to a specific spot. I'd be on a specific car on the train, and I would have the kids there. And then I could get off the train, and Andrew would get on the train, so that he had to leave his class a little bit early, and I would make it in time for my class.
And everybody on the train's like, wait, what happened there?
You just left your kids on the train.
But God helped us through that, and it was a great school. In fact, it also helped us with the culture, because we would take field trips to go see things around Tokyo, and our teachers would make us use Japanese while we're out and about, which was great practice. Not always enjoyable, but great practice. But we enjoyed seeing the culture. Another thing that we liked to do was, on our days off, go to the places that the Japanese people were going on their days off. So it might be an aquarium or the zoo or whatever it may be, just to see what it's like to live life in Tokyo. Our kids also got involved in that.
They enjoyed seeing different things that as we went around, especially the aquariums and things like that. The church where we serve,
And school, they learned a lot of culture. Mm-hmm. And so we enjoyed that along with the food. We loved trying new foods and enjoying the food, or at least most of it. But we also loved sharing it with people. When we went around Tokyo, one thing that we definitely learned about was the trains in the morning. Rush hour trains were not fun. More importantly than that, though, we learned how to avoid the rush hour trains, which is a great skill. Anytime that we see the crowds, though, we kept one thing in mind. Statistically, on that platform, there are 0 Christians. I have counted the heads, and there are less than 333 people on that platform. So there are statistically 0 Christians there. Anytime we saw a large crowd gathering, even thousands of people, there may be less than 10 Christians. It's sobering because people don't know God. They don't know what Jesus has done for them. But there is an element of it being just a little exciting as well. Because I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to share the gospel with somebody who has never heard anything about the gospel before, but it is a little addicting. Being the first person to share the gospel with somebody. Japan is a place that needs the gospel, and we're thankful that there are places that do share.
We served at a small church plant called Megami or Grace Baptist Church in Tama. And one thing that was hard at first about our church was that everyone spoke Japanese, which makes sense, we're in Japan, but they didn't have many people who were confident in English. And so that really stretched our Japanese ability, but it also made it really difficult for us to understand what was going on.
So at the beginning, we had to do things like, well, not have to. The ways we were able to serve were through music, or I was able to teach some sermons and lessons in English. But as our Japanese increased, we were able to do a little bit more. I've actually preached now 3 times in Japanese, and that was probably one of the most humbling things that I've done. It's not the way I'd like to do it, but I read it, and God was able to use it, and hopefully we will continue to grow in those skills. With COVID, it was interesting that the rules were a little more strict than at least other parts in America. And so we were not able to hold services for a lot of 2021 and a good portion of 2020 as well. And so our church was looking for ways to interact. And one of our church members actually made a little brochure that was talking about how God could help with anxiety and with depression and just the uneasiness that people were feeling about COVID. We were able to hand out about 20,000 of them to our community. And so it was just a great way to see the church working together, everybody from the young kids to I think we had some 80-year-old octogenarians, 80-year-old great-grandpas and grandmas who were handing out flyers. And thankfully, as we were ending our time as we were getting ready to leave, we were able to open up the church again. And as of May, they were able to do Sunday school again. So we're thankful that church is starting to get back to normal.
And as we wanted to develop relationships, we looked around, and at first I thought, well, we'll just go to the park and I'll meet some other kids there. And I couldn't figure out when people went to the park, because when I was at the park, it was empty. And then when it was nap time, the park was full. And so we were trying to figure this out, and it wasn't working. And then Jonah started to go to school nearby us. And all of a sudden, when we were at the park, it was when other people were there. And when we saw people at the park, they're like, oh, you're Jonah's mom from this class, because you don't really use other moms' names, apparently. You just say, so-and-so's mom, which is an interesting thing. But we got involved in the school. We were able to go to events there and talk to parents through that. And that helped us to really connect with our community and to get to know people.
And then COVID hit. And suddenly all the events at school were gone. We weren't really supposed to talk much with parents before or after school. And we couldn't help but ask God, why? Why? We had all these great ways to connect. Why are they being taken away? And so we went through that, and then in the middle of, with we weren't supposed to go places, and we were supposed to be in our homes more often. The thing is, kids need this thing called exercise. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but our 600 square foot apartment didn't seem big enough for them to get that. And so one idea that we came up with was we could go to the parks. It's outdoors, and it was okay for us to do that. And so we started doing that. And apparently every other parent had the same idea. So before, when we would be at an event and watching the event and able to just talk a little bit, now all the parents are taking their kids to the park where the kids are playing and the parents sit around with really nothing to do. So they talked. And it was great to just get to know the parents and get to know the families and interact in that way. In fact, in a lot of ways, it turned out better than the events did before. As the kids grew closer, as they played at the park, the parents did as well. And so we're thankful for that. We also want to talk about how God's worked in us. We don't want to paint this unrealistic, rosy picture. Moving our family to Japan was one of the hardest things we've ever done. We uprooted our family from our other family, from friends. We moved to a country where we didn't know the language very well. We were in a new place with new people that we only really knew by name. And it was hard. And there were times where we started to question, God, do you really want us to be here still? Are you closing doors? Is that what's going on? And in God's faithfulness, every time that we were questioning, every time that we were starting to wonder, God would send encouragement. It might have been through an email. It might have been through a letter. It might have been through somebody at church coming up and saying, I noticed that I can understand you better lately. Keep up the good work with Japanese, which actually was a compliment, and we were appreciate it, because there are definitely times where Janae and I would go home and be like, I don't think they understood anything we said.
But they were very kind about it.
They were. But every time that we were struggling, God sent help. God sent encouragement, and we're thankful for that. God was faithful.
Starting school was really difficult, not only for us, but also for the kids. The school where we went, they were excited about because of the slide and the sandbox and different things that they were able to do, but it was only Japanese. I remember Jonah's teacher talked to me one day after school, and she said, we had an English teacher come to school today, and Jonah just totally relaxed when he heard English. And he was a different kid. And just different things, she had asked for, how do you say, don't play in the sinks, or, whatever. The things that she would ask how to say in English was interesting to me. But one day after school, she said, what do you eat at your house? And I was like, I don't know, just food? She's like, well, we had hamburgers for lunch today. And Jonah said, Japanese food, no. And I realized that they had like a hamburger steak with a demi-glaze sauce or something on it, and it was definitely not like what we had at our house. But she was just really surprised how different it would be. But through the process, Jonah learned to speak Japanese at an appropriate level. He learned how to eat a lot of the food that was in his Japanese lunchbox, and he made a lot of friends, and so that was a good experience. I was able to interact with different moms. There was one mom who walked the same route to school as I did, and I learned that she was a Japanese teacher, and so she was really easy to communicate with, and her son was in the same class that Jonah was, and so at one of the first moms meetings, they were like, oh, what are we going to do about Jonah's mom? How are we going to talk to her? And she said, well, you could just try speaking Japanese. She understands. And I was like, oh, she thinks I understand. This is great. Which I did understand more and more, but I was really thankful for her encouragement there and her ability to just kind of step in and help me out with different things. And then there was one other mom who, the first day that we came to school, she came up to me and in English said, I lived in America for 8 months, and I want to help you. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. And so she would help me at first she translated a lot of different things for me, because there is a lot of information that comes home, and it takes a lot of time to go through something in a language that's not your own and try to figure out what is going on. What do I actually need to know from all of this? How do I know what day is, PE day, so they need PE clothes, or library day. And she just helped me work through the day-to-day stuff of that. And then she helped in a lot of different ways later, too. But she was a godsend. I mean, she's not a believer, but when she lived in America, all of her friends were Christians. So I know that God is chasing her and pursuing her enough that even the school that her son was enrolled in the year before closed down. So she had to find a new school, and he sent her to the school where we enrolled Jonah.
And Isla.
And Isla eventually.
Isla was able to go almost 1 year before we left. But just seeing God work through all that. One other thing we want to mention is about 3 years ago, Janae's father passed away from cancer. And it's kind of one of those nightmare type things of we're on the other side of the world and just working out how to get back and the timing of all of that. And he passed away while we were still in Japan, and just everything with that. And I've read many times the passage that talks about God giving peace that passes all understanding. And we're not going to claim to be experts on that, but we definitely understand it a little better now. Just the peace that God gave us, being in Japan and working through airlines and working through schedules, and just how God worked all of it out, that we could be back here, be here for the funeral, have that time. God is faithful. He is a good God, and he cares for us. There are so many times where he was meeting needs before we even knew we had them. And so we're thankful for him. When he calls us to do something, he helps us do it. All the things that we've learned, we then want to take back for our second term. We plan to leave in January, and we will be roughly 4 years of time there serving.
We want to continue learning Japanese. We have not arrived yet, but we are not planning to take an extended time of classes. We want to do some brushing up courses, but we really want to get out and learn Japanese by using it.
We also want to continue learning culture. We know that there are events that go on in our community, and we stumble upon them at times and get to take part, but we'd like to be more active in the community and doing what we can. We also would like to visit other churches. Our ability to do that was hindered this last term, but we would like to get to know the other gospel preaching churches in the area and some of the fellowshipping churches across Japan.
We also plan to stay at the same church. So Pastor Iwasa has been gracious in saying, yes, we would love to help you a little bit more. We haven't had a lot of opportunities to get super involved in the church with things shutting down for COVID and things like that. So we wanted to be able to really plug in there, and then also have the opportunity to ask somebody with experience and who knows the culture lots of questions.
Yes. Part of that will be doing English ministries. That is not our main focus, but we do know that God gave us the ability to speak English, and that is Japanese people love to learn English from native speakers. And so it's a talent that God has given us, and we want to use it. Which, by the way, I've noticed that every single person I've talked to today speaks English. So if you want to put that talent to use, I've got a place for you in Japan. So you can talk to us later.
We also plan to continue building relationships. I would love to have Isla go back to the same school where we were, and maybe eventually Josiah go as well, if God puts us in a place that's close enough to that. But just building relationships through the community, opening up our home, and sharing life with people.
And part of relationships, we would like to tell you a little more about one that Janae had mentioned earlier, about her friend from school that wanted to help her.
The second time that we all got together was for the opening ceremony. Japan has a lot of formal things that go on. And so for opening ceremony, my friend was there with her husband and her older kids, and she was really excited to introduce her husband to Andrew. Her husband also speaks fluent English. And they said, you know what? We have sports day coming up at our school. Would you come with us and watch our kids play their events?
And so we thought that'd be a great opportunity, also a very culture-related opportunity, because the moms get up at like 4 o'clock in the morning to make these picnic lunches that you then share with family and friends. You invite pretty much everybody you know to come watch your kids at the sports day. It's a family and community event. So we're excited to get to go.
And it gave Andrew a chance to get to talk to the husband a little bit more. And after that, we started to get together a little bit more. They asked us, we know Christmas is really important. Would you come to our house and celebrate Christmas with us? Just because we know you're missing your family and things. And so we had a little Christmas party with them, having the traditional Christmas chicken, because KFC had a great advertisement in the 70s or something. So everyone in Japan believes that Americans eat KFC and Christmas cake on Christmas Day. So if you don't, you're not doing it right.
And there are lines at the Kentucky Fried Chicken to get chicken, so.
And we were able to explain to them a little bit more about what Christmas means to us and how Jesus came for us. And then after that, my mom came to visit, and my friend said, well, you're going on a trip. Can we join you? And so she came with her 3 kids on this trip that my mom and I took, and we got to spend a lot of time together then. And then everything shut down for COVID. And we said, well, what are we going to do?
The husband works in an industry that he had to be very careful about following protocols. So we couldn't go out to eat. We couldn't invite them over. They couldn't invite us over. And it was just, what do we do? And God said, hey, there are parks.
So on Sunday afternoons, we would meet at the park for a few hours each week and exchange Japanese and English. And one day while we were talking, we saw another foreigner walking across the field. And being the ever bold missionaries that we are, we said to our kids, hey, there's another American-looking person. Go see if those kids speak English. And with a little bit of persuading, they went over and said hi.
And then I went over and found out that the man's name was Christian. And so I asked, what are you doing? What brings you to Japan? And he said, well, I'm a professor at one of the local universities. And I said, oh, well, what do you teach? I teach Japanese literature. Oh, okay, well, about that. And then he said, oh, and I teach religion. Okay, well, I can talk about religion. So I start talking with him, and he is from one of the Eastern Orthodox sects that I had never heard of before. So that was really fascinating. But as we're talking, our Japanese friend starts coming over, and he's fluent in English. So he's listening to our conversation now. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, I have to make sure I'm using words he can understand, because he's not going to know the Christian lingo, but he understands English. So I'm kind of using common words more than the typical Christian words that we would use. And about 20 minutes or so, he's listening to our conversation. Christian then says goodbye, and I've never met him again. I'd like to see him, but I haven't had the opportunity yet. But as my friend and I are then walking back, I turned to him and said, so how much of that did you understand? He said, I think I got about everything. I said, so do you have questions about that? He said, well, and then we spent another 20 minutes talking about the difference of churches. He didn't realize there were such big differences between the different kinds of churches and denominations. And so I was glad that I got to explain about some of those differences, not necessarily because of the differences part, but because in order to explain these, you have to explain the gospel. You have to explain what Jesus' death on the cross means for the people, for the church, in order to explain why churches are different. So my friend was able to hear the gospel. It was all intellectual. He was curious about knowledge, but I'm thankful that God a lot of times uses the brain, intellect, curiosity in order to reach the heart. And so we just keep praying for our friends and hope that God will continue to work in them and that we and others will have opportunities to share the gospel.
It's really neat how God works in just the little ways, whether it's, you're telling a story. When Josiah was born, we talked a lot about names, and so I would be able to tell her the stories about, King Josiah from the Bible or Jonah's name. And I remember after I told her the story of Jonah, she said, your God loves people like that? So yes, he does. He really does.
And so we are looking forward to seeing what God does in their lives. We've got a few prayer requests we'd like to share with you. First off, wisdom for housing location. Our 600 square foot apartment isn't really going to cut it as a family of 5 and for some of the ministry things that we'd like to do. And so we're looking for a bigger apartment in the general area that we were before. So we would we're praying for wisdom, that God would lead us to the right house and to the right area, and most importantly, the neighbors he wants us to have, that we can interact with and build that relationship that we can share the gospel with.
We also have a large turnover coming up. Our senior missionaries are in their late 60s, and so they're looking forward to retirement and passing on the baton. And as they do that, we're there, and then there's another couple who's about our age, and then there's one couple who just joined BMM this last Friday, where they officially became appointees to Japan. And so we're excited to take the reins from them and learn from them. And so we have a lot of questions and transitions there, and we just really pray that would go smoothly.
Yes, and we have a Bible school, a cemetery, a camp. We have a lot of ministries that are also part of this handing over from the veteran generation to the younger generation. And so we just pray for wisdom and that God's hand will be in all that as we make a lot of decisions in the next few years. Part of that I specifically want to mention is the BMM headquarters. Right now, our BMM Japan headquarters are in Fukushima, which I don't know if you recognize that name, but that is where the tsunami and the radiation and all that happened. Currently, there is only one widowed missionary who is in Fukushima right now. And so the chairman and the future chairman at this point are all in the Tokyo area. We would like to, as God leads, move our headquarters down from Fukushima to the at least greater Tokyo area. That involves getting land and a building that would be owned by BMM Japan so we can do that. That can get a little pricey, and so we're just praying that God will give us wisdom and his timing and his location for that.
And then we also really need to continue learning language so that we can minister in Japanese.
Right now we can do about everything that we want to do in town. When we were moving out, we did pretty much everything with City Hall. We go to the doctor, things like that. Our Japanese is functional, but it's not where we want it to be for ministry, for counseling, for helping people. We need a little deeper language for that. The last prayer request we have, I'm going to let, instead of telling you, I'm going to let Jesus tell you. These are his words. Then he, Jesus, said to them, "The harvest truly is great, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." This is something that is challenging and encouraging. I'm encouraged first by the fact that this is his harvest. Sometimes I think we run that it is our work, it is our job, it is things that we have to do. But we need to remember that this is his work. It is his harvest. I'm also encouraged that there is a harvest. Jesus is telling his disciples, the 70 or 72 people that he is sending out, that they need to pray to the Lord that he will send out laborers, not if there is a harvest, but into his harvest that does exist. Meaning there is fruit out there. There is a harvest. I ask that you will be praying to God, to the Lord of the harvest, to send out laborers. I think it'll come as no surprise that as a missionary to Japan, that I'm going to say we need missionaries in Japan. The church is not at a level where they can function well without outside help. There is just too few Christians. We would love to talk to you if you're interested in missions in Japan, whether it's long-term or short-term. If you're interested in missions in general, we also love to talk to people who are interested in missions. We have lots of connections across the world, and we would love to get you connected with somebody who is directly in a field you might be interested in, or an area or a continent that you're interested in. Please talk to us. However, I'm not naive enough to think that it's just about Japan or even just about foreign missions. I know that we need laborers here in America. And especially when I'm talking about America, I don't just mean full-time workers. Yes, we need people who their job is to pastor, to work at a church, to work at various ministries. We do need those. But we also need laborers who are going out and serving God where God has placed you, where God has put you on a daily basis. That might be school, that might be work, that might be the grocery store. Wherever you are, looking for opportunities to serve God, to fulfill the Great Commission, to be the workers that God has called all of us to be. Please pray that there would be laborers sent out in Japan, across the world, in Illinois, here in Alhambra. But overall, we need people to go out. As you pray, there's a very good likelihood that God is going to call you or your children or your grandchildren to be those laborers, full-time or as full-time Christians in a full-time work. Whatever that may look like, I hope that you will be willing to accept and help that. Please pray for workers. We need it. And my life may be relatively short, and my time serving God might be relatively short as well, but I can say that I have never doubted it. I have never regretted accepting God's call, moving my family, thankfully, happily, to Japan. And I don't think you will either. Following God is well worth it. He is faithful and He is good. We have on our table back there a brochure that's Pray 938. Pray 938. It's actually based off the sister passage from Matthew 9:38 that the brochure is put out by Baptist Missions, and it's a way to help you pray for laborers. It's a 30-day guide that walks through a different way to pray each day. And so if you're interested in that, we've got some on the table, and if we run out, I've got more that we can put out. Don't be afraid to ask. But that would be a practical way that you could pray each day for laborers. Also on our table, we have a sign-up sheet for our prayer letter if you aren't already getting it. We have new prayer cards, and here's some contact information that you can get a hold of us with. We love answering questions. I'll head off one question right now. Yes, we do eat and like sushi. But if you have any other questions about Japan, about ministry, anything, feel free to contact us. Email is the best way for that, but we would love to keep in contact with you. We appreciate just your prayers over the years, and some of you that connect with us more regularly, and we're thankful for that. Thank you for the opportunity to come here and share about what God's doing. It's not us. We couldn't do any of this without God and without the people like you who are praying. And so we're thankful for that, and we are thankful for our great God. I think we might have a few minutes for questions. Okay. I remember the clock was a little off, but I don't want